Hello, welcome to HTML and CSS for complete beginners. This tutorial is designed to give you a quick start with HTML and CSS by building a practical project. No prior experience or knowledge is required. Let's take a quick look at what we will cover in this tutorial. Basic HTML. We will start with understanding the essential HTML tags like div, paragraph, heading, and more. CSS basics. Learn about CSS selectors, properties, the box model, and more to style your page. Lists and dictionaries, tables, forms, media, navigation and responsive design. Let's get started. See you in the next lesson. What is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It is not a programming language, but a markup language, meaning it doesn't perform logic or calculations. Instead, it structures content on web page, telling the browser what elements to display and how they should be arranged. HTML is made up of tags, which define elements on web page. Each tag has a specific role, such as displaying headings, paragraphs, links, images, or forms. Here are basic rules of HTML. Tags are enclosed in angle brackets. Most tags come in pairs, an opening tag to start the element and a closing tag to end it. The closing tag includes a slash at the beginning to indicate where the element stops. HTML documents follow a hierarchical structure, meaning elements can be nested inside each other to create a meaningful layout. The latest standard of HTML is HTML5. HTML is the foundation of every website. It works alongside CSS for styling and JavaScript for interactivity to create dynamic, visually appealing web pages. Without HTML, web browsers wouldn't know how to structure or display content. What is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it is what makes websites look good. While HTML structures the content, CSS controls its appearance. Things like colors, fonts, layouts, and animations. Without CSS, every web page would look plain and unstyled. It follows a system of rules which consists of a selector, which targets the HTML element, a set of properties, like color or margin, and values assigned to those properties, like red or 10 pixels. And that's your quick theoretical intro into HTML and CSS. Now, let's set up our working environment and start building. I assume you don't want to code on a piece of paper, so go to this website, code visualstudio.com, download, link in resources. Choose the right installer for your operating system. Then, open the downloaded file and follow the installation instructions. Once installed, launch VS Code. Now, let's organize our work by creating a project folder. This is where we will store all our HTML and CSS files. Create a new folder in a source folder on C drive and name it something like HTML CSS tutorial or wherever you like. Go to VS Code, choose Open Folder, and select your newly created folder. Every website needs an HTML file. Let's create one. In the left Explorer panel of VS Code, click on the New File icon and name the file index.html. This is the default name for the homepage of website. Let's quickly generate a basic HTML structure. Type !, Shift+1, and press Enter. VS Code will autocomplete a basic HTML structure for you. Now, let's add a Hello World heading inside the body section. Type H1 and press Enter. And inside the H1 tags type Hello World. Now go to your project folder where you saved index.html and double-click index.html. It should open in your default browser. Right now, every time we make a change in our HTML, we have to manually refresh the browser. And that is annoying, so let's fix that with Live Server. In VS Code, click on the extensions icon. Search for Live Server and click Install. Once installed, right-click on index.html and select Open with Live Server. Your default browser will open, and now, every time you save, the page updates automatically. Let's test it. Change your H1 to Hello World and press Ctrl S to save. Your browser updates instantly, no manual refresh needed. Let's make sure our workspace is comfortable. To split the screen for Windows users, press Windows plus left arrow to move VS Code to the left, and choose your browser to place it on the right. Now, you can code on the left and see changes on the right. You can resize both windows by dragging the middle divider to adjust the width. To maximize your browser, press Windows plus up arrow twice. To go back, press Windows plus right arrow. To move to the new line without breaking the current one, you can press Ctrl and Enter. In this configuration, we might want to have some more workspace to code. Here's how to make VS Code more minimalistic. To hide the sidebar, click the Toggle Primary Sidebar button. To hide the minimap, the tiny code preview on the right-click on the minimap area and uncheck Minimap. To move the activity bar, the icons on the left, to the top, you can go to Menu to the View, Appearance, Activity bar position, and then choose Top. You can change the color theme by going to Manage, Themes, and Color Theme. I will try Monokai Themed, or you can choose any theme you like. Optionally, you can hide the status bar at the bottom by going to the View, Appearance, and unchecking Status bar. In order to wrap the code to the width of the VS Code, you can press Alt and Z. I will also hide this sidebar again, and now we have maximum space for coding. To get the most out of this tutorial, keep this in mind. Check the Tutorial Resources folder. It might contain useful links, source code, and sometimes files like images or icons. If your code isn't working, compare it with the lesson's GitHub repository, linked in each lesson under source code. This will show you the final working version of the code. Practice and experiment. Try tweaking the examples, changing values, and adding your own elements to reinforce what you have learned. And finally, ask for help. If you get stuck, don't hesitate to search online or ask questions in tutorial Q&A. Every HTML document follows a specific structure that ensures proper rendering in web browsers. Let's break it down step by step. The very first thing in an HTML document is the doctype declaration. Doctype HTML. This tells the browser this is an HTML5 document. Without it, browsers might not render your page correctly, and older browsers might have unexpected styling issues. Right after doctype HTML, there is an HTML tag. This is the root element of our web page. Everything inside our HTML document is wrapped inside this tag. The lang attribute tells search engines and screen readers that the page is in English. This improves accessibility and SEO. Next, we have the head section. The head section doesn't display anything on the page, but it contains important information about the document, including the title of the page. We can title our page HTML CSS tutorial, for example. Head also contains links to style sheets and external resources, and meta information for SEO and accessibility. For example, meta charset UTF-8 defines the character encoding for the document. UTF-8 supports most languages and special characters. And meta name viewport ensures the web page is responsive on different devices. Finally, there is the body tag. Everything visible on the web page, like text, images, links, goes inside the body tag. To sum up, doctype HTML tells the browser this is an HTML5 document. HTML is the root of the web page. Head contains metadata, and body contains all visible page content. Now that we understand the core structure of an HTML document, let's start building our project. First, we are going to create a short About Me section. Inside the body section, type P and hit Enter. We just created a paragraph. In HTML, tags consist of 3 elements: opening tag, closing tag, and text goes between these tags. Let's add some text to introduce ourselves and save changes. And now our text appeared in the browser. We can add another paragraph. Now you might be thinking, DevDiva, I'm not trying to be George R.R. Martin over here. I didn't come here to write essays. And I've got you covered. Head to the lorem ipsum IO, link in resources, and click Generate. Lorem ipsum is a classic filler text used in web development. Copy some text from there, and voila! Okay, let's inspect our paragraph. Right-click on the paragraph and click Inspect. This will open Developer Tools. Now you can highlight an HTML element by clicking on it in the panel on the right. Paragraph is a block-level HTML element, which means that it takes up the full width of its container and always starts on a new line. Remember these 3 key points about paragraph. Syntax: start with the opening tag, write your text, and then close with closing tag. Block-level element: in HTML, a block-level element starts in a new line and takes up the whole available width. Semantics: paragraph has a semantic meaning, indicating that the content inside is a paragraph of text, which improves accessibility and SEO. To add a main title to our section, let's type H, select H1, and press Enter. We've just created a heading element. And let's name this section About Me. To further organize our content, let's add some subheadings, like H2 for experience, before our first paragraph. Next, we can add a smaller H4 heading for interests before the second paragraph. HTML supports 6 levels of headings, from H1, the largest one, to H6, the smallest. Headings help structure your content, improve readability, and make your page more organized. We can also inspect the heading element. Right-click on About Me and select Inspect. As you can see, a heading is also a block-level element, which means it starts on a new line and takes up the full width. By default, headings are styled with bold text and have space around them. Now, I want to quickly make my sections more distinct by adding some horizontal lines. The HR element stands for horizontal rule. Unlike other elements, it's self-enclosing, so you don't need a closing tag. Here are key points about headings. Syntax. Use H1 to H6 tags, with H1 being the most important and H6 the least. Block level. Headings start on a new line and take up the full available width of their container. Semantics. Headings convey meaning about the structure of your content, indicating sections. Accessibility. Screen readers detect headings, making it easier for users to navigate your content. CEO. Search engines analyze headings to determine content structure and relevance, which can enhance visibility in search results. Let's say we want some parts of the text to stand out, like highlighting my programming experience. Select the text fragment, press Ctrl-Shift and P to open Command Palette, and search for Emmet, wrap with abbreviation. Type B and press Enter. The B tag stands for bold, making the text inside the tag bold. Now, I want my name to be in italics. Follow the same steps. Select the text, press Ctrl-Shift and P, and choose Wrap with abbreviation. This time, wrap the text in the I tag for italics. The I tag makes the selected text italicized. Let's underline some text as well. For example, lorem ipsum. The U tag stands for underline and it is used to underline the text inside of it. Now, let's add a new line after the first sentence of the second paragraph. Type BR and press Enter. The text after this sentence will now appear on a new line. The BR tag stands for line break. It is a self-enclosing tag, meaning it doesn't need a closing tag, similar to the HR horizontal rule element. Here are main takeaways. Bold. Use the B tag to make text bold. Italics. Use the I tag to italicize text. Underline. Use the U tag to underline text. And line break. Use the self-enclosing BR tag to insert a new line. Let's say we want to add a border around our content. We can use the div element for this. First, we need to wrap everything in the div tag. Select the content you want to wrap, press Ctrl-Shift and P, search for Emmet, wrap with abbreviation, and type div and press Enter. This will wrap the selected content automatically. Now let's inspect our HTML structure. The div element is a block-level element in HTML used to group and organize content. It stands for division and acts as a container to hold other elements. Unlike headings or paragraphs, div elements don't add any semantic meaning to the content. They are purely for structure and layout. Now, let's add some style to our div. First, go to the head section of the page. Inside, add a style tag. Now we can write some CSS rules. We want to target the div element, so let's type div. Next, open curly brackets. Now we can start defining CSS properties for our div. Let's type border, 1 pixel, solid and black, and save. And now we have a border around our content. Let's also add some background color. Background color, light blue, sets the background color. and padding 20 pixels, add space inside the div. As you can see, CSS is pretty simple. We target an element, div, and specified properties like border and padding along with their values. We will dive deeper into CSS styling in future lessons. For now, let's remember these 3 key points about the div element. The div tag is used as a container for grouping content together. Like headings and paragraphs, a div is a block-level element. And unlike headings or paragraphs, a div doesn't add any semantic meaning to the content. It's purely for layout and grouping of elements. With CSS, we can control the appearance of HTML elements. So far, we've applied styles to our div element using the style tag inside the head section of the document. This method of applying styles is called internal CSS because the styles are written directly within the HTML file. Let's add another CSS rule, this time for the body element. Color dark slate gray. Now, all the text on the page turned a grayish color, since all the elements like paragraphs and headers are child elements of the body, they inherit this rule. Hence the name, cascading style sheets. Styles cascade down to child elements. We can override inherited styles by defining a more specific rule. For example, let's change the color of all H1 elements. Color royal blue. This rule takes precedence over the body's text color now. Another way to apply styles is by using the style attribute directly within an HTML element. For example, H1 style equals color sea green. This is called inline CSS. Inline styles take precedence over internal styles, overriding the previously defined text color for the H1 element. To add multiple inline styles, separate them with a semicolon. For example, background color dark gray. That looks a bit silly, so let's remove it, but you get the idea. A more common and scalable way to apply styles is by using an external CSS file. Let's create a new file called index.css and define styles just like we did in the style tag. H1, color, aquamarine. To apply these styles to our web page, we need to link the CSS file inside the head section of index.html. Link rel equals style sheet and href, which will be the path to our style sheet, in our case is index.css. We still don't see any changes. Remember, the closer a style is to an element, the more priority it has. So right now, the inline style is taking precedence. So let's remove it. And now the internal style kicks in. And once we remove that, the external style finally takes effect. External style sheets are the preferred method in modern web development, so let's move all our styles to index.css. You can press Ctrl+Shift+K and then Ctrl+Shift+F to format your file. And now let's remove the style tag from our HTML file to keep it clean. To sum up, there are 3 different ways to apply CSS. Inline CSS, using the style attribute inside an HTML element. Internal CSS, which is writing styles inside a style tag in the head section. External CSS, writing styles in a separate CSS file and linking it to the HTML document. Also remember cascading effect. Styles applied to the parent elements are inherited by the child elements unless overridden. Style precedence: the closer a style is defined to an element, the higher its priority. Inline style takes the highest priority, then internal and external. Let's talk about CSS selectors. To style an element, we first need to target it using a selector. We've already used the element selector before. The element selector is simply the name of an HTML element, and it applies styles to all instances of that element on the page. What if we want to change the color of the first paragraph? Paragraph, color, and let's pick some color. This changes every paragraph on the page. Luckily, HTML allows us to define attributes on elements, so let's give the first paragraph an ID attribute. ID is a unique identifier of the element, so never assign the same ID to more than one element on the page. Now, we can use an ID selector to style just this paragraph by using hashtag followed by ID name, hashtag experience. Great! Now only the first paragraph changed color. Another way to target elements is by using a class selector. Let's define a CSS class for headings. So dot heading, color rosy brown. Now we can apply this class to multiple elements by adding the class attributes to the HTML elements. Since we added the heading class to only 2 headings, the third heading stays unchanged. The big advantage of using a class is that it can be reused across multiple elements, unlike the element selector, which would style all headings. Lastly, there's the universal selector, which selects everything on the page. Asterisk, border, 1 pixel, solid gray. This applies a gray border to every element. To sum up, element selector, like ph1 or div, targets all elements of that type. ID selector targets a specific element. IDs must be unique. Class selector targets multiple elements with the same class. Universal or all selector targets everything on the page. And attributes use HTML attributes to define element properties, like ID or class. To understand CSS properly, we need to get familiar with the box model, which applies to every HTML element. To see how the box model works, let's add another div below our existing one and give both unique IDs. So the first ID will be About Me, and the second div will have ID Box Model. Now let's simplify our CSS by keeping only the essential styles. So I'm going to remove all these styles we practiced on in previous lesson, and I will apply these styles to About Me ID, and at this point the page should look like this. The box model is essentially an invisible box around every element. Let's visualize it by adding a border to our second div. So hashtag box model, border 10 pixels, solid, and let's pick out some color. Each box has a margin, which is the space outside the border. Margin 50 pixels. This adds space around each side of the element. Margins are transparent, so they don't have any color. Let's also add padding. Padding 30 pixels. Padding is a space between the content and the border of the element. We can also control the size of the element. For example, width 300 pixels and height 400 pixels. Now our box is so big that we might need to scroll down to see it. When you set width and height in CSS, you're only defining the content area. The total size of an element also includes padding, border, and margins. Here's a quick breakdown of the CSS box model. In the center, we have our content. Content has height and width. Padding is a space between content and the border. Border is the visible outline around the element. Margin is transparent space outside the border, pushing the element away from others. Now that we understand margins, paddings, and borders, let's talk about a quicker way to define their values. If we write just one value, it applies to all 4 sides. And we can also define each side separately. For example, margin top, 100 pixels, or margin left, and so on. Instead of writing separate values for each side, we can shorthand them using a single line of CSS. For example, padding 30 pixels and 100 pixels. With 2 values, the first applies to the top and bottom, and the second to left and right. Let's make border sides vary in width. Border width 5 pixels, 10 pixels, and 15 pixels. Using 3 values, we specify top, left and right, and then bottom. When we use 4 values, they follow the clockwise order. Border width 5 pixels, 10 pixels, 15 pixels, and 30 pixels. Think of it as moving clockwise around the element, starting at the top and moving right, down to the bottom, and then left. Let's clean up our workspace by removing the extra div and styles from the previous lesson. Now let's talk about colors. We already learned how to define text and background colors in CSS. A neat thing about CSS is that it comes with a bunch of predefined color names, like light blue, which makes it super easy to get started. VS Code also has a built-in color picker, which lets you manually fine-tune colors. It automatically formats colors in RGB format. If you want to add transparency, use RGBA, where the 4th value controls opacity. 0 is fully transparent, and 1 will be fully opaque. CSS also supports hex and HLS. Each format has its strengths, but they all achieve the same result. The best practice is always to keep a consistent color scheme. If you're not sure what colors work well together, there are plenty of tools that generate color palettes for you, for example, Color Hunt or Colors CO. Now I'm going to pick some colors from Color Hunt. I like this one and this one, and I will use it as an inspiration for my website. Feel free to choose your own color palette. We are going to use it in the next lesson. To keep our CSS clean and maintainable, let's introduce CSS variables. They allow us to store values like colors or spacing in one place and reuse them throughout our style sheet. Let's define some color variables. CSS variables are declared inside the root selector, which represents the entire document. And now I will add some color variables like primary color, secondary color, and you can define your own colors or copy mine from the resources. Remember that the variable declaration starts with 2 lines: background color, heading color, and text color. We want a good contrast between background and text, so let's pick a darker shade for text. Now let's apply these variables to our page. For body text color, let's give it a text color. So var for variable, parentheses, and we have to pass a variable name. So text color. with the 2 lines or hyphens in the beginning of the name. So for the background color, I will use var background color. For level 1 heading, I will choose heading color, and then for level 2 heading, a secondary color. And now for the About Me div here, I will use text color as a border color and primary color for the background color. Also, let's change the level for header to level 2 header for better hierarchy. Okay, now our website has a consistent color scheme. A great thing about CSS variables is that they allow us to switch color schemes easily. Since variables can be updated dynamically, we can create a dark mode by changing them inside a class. So let's create a class with the name dark mode, and then let's redefine all the colors that we used. And again, you can define your own colors or copy mine from the resources. Now, let's apply this class to the body element. So body class dark mode. And just like that, we've switched to the dark mode. If a variable is not defined, we can provide a fallback value. For example, h1 color will be some color and then comma tomato. If some color is missing, the text color will default to tomato instead. And in our case, we did not define some color variable, so now this heading is red. Here's a quick recap. CSS variables store reusable values for colors, spacing, and more. Define them inside root element using variable name. Use var parentheses variable name to apply them. Variables can be updated dynamically using classes. Fallback values ensure styles still apply if a variable is missing. Let's talk about typography. Typography is all about fonts and how text appears on a web page. Let's start by adding some default font styles for our text elements: font family, Arial, and sans serif. So we change the default font to Arial. We already defined the color, so let's add line height 1.6. This increases space between lines for better readability. You may wonder, what does sans serif mean? The first value, Arial, is our preferred font. The second value is a fallback in case the first one isn't available. Sans serif is a fallback in case the first 2 fonts aren't available, meaning the family of fonts that will be smooth and modern looking. There are 5 generic font families. Serif, for example Times New Roman or Georgia, for traditional look. Sans serif, like Arial, modern and clean. Monospace, for example Consolas, for code-like text. Cursive, like Comic Sans, handwritten feel. And fantasy, like Papyrus or Impact, for decorative style. For websites, you usually want to stick to serif or sans serif because they are the easiest to read. We can control font size using different units. For example, paragraphs, font size 20 pixels, or font size 1.5 em. This is relative to the parent element font size, 1.5 times the parent element text size. Or font size, and here we have some predefined values like small, medium, large, etc. And let's use medium. Predefined values like small, medium, and large depend on the browser's default settings. For more control, you may want to use pixels. We can control the thickness of the text using font weight. It ranges from 100 to 900, and higher value means thicker font. For example, 900, or simply bold. Let's leave it at 200 for a thinner font. We can also control font style, like making text italic. Font style italic. But for now, let's keep it normal. We can change how text is aligned using the text align, and we have options like left, center, justify, and right. But for better readability, let's justify our paragraphs. We can also add decorations and transformations to our text. Text transform, and we have options like uppercase, lowercase, capitalize, etc. And let's choose uppercase. Text decoration, we have options like none, underline, line through, and let's choose line through. We won't use these for now, but it's good to know that they exist. So here's our final paragraph styling. Remember the most important properties. Font family. Choose the font for your page and always include a fallback value. Font size. Set the size of the text using pixels, relative or predefined values. Font weight. Adjust the boldness of the text, 100 to 900 or keywords like bold. Font style. Make text italic or normal. Text align. Control text alignment like left, right, center, or justify to improve readability. Alright, I am switching back to light mode for this lesson. Now, let's take a look at our website in full screen mode. I think it would look much better if we made this div narrower and centered on the screen. We already know how to control the width of a div. So, About Me div, width 600 pixels. But now, it looks off since it's not centered on the screen. One way to center a div horizontally is by using the margin auto trick. So margin auto. Setting margin auto makes the left and right margins automatically adjust, centering the div horizontally but not vertically. This only works if a width is defined. However, I still think it would look better if it were centered vertically too. Let's try another method. This time, let's use Flexbox. First, let's remove Margin Auto and take a look at the body element. If you inspect the body, you will see that it doesn't take up the full height of the screen. Let's fix that by setting its height to 100% of the viewport height. So height 100 view heights. Makes sure the body fills the entire viewport height. If we set it to 50, it will fill half of the viewport and so on. The next step is to turn the body to a flex container. Display Flex. Flexbox, Flexible Box Layout, is a CSS layout system that allows you to easily align and distribute elements within a container. Now, we can align elements inside the Flex container to our liking. Since we want to center a div, let's add Justify Content Center, which centers child elements horizontally, and Align Items Center, which centers child elements vertically. Since our div is inside body, Flexbox automatically centers it both horizontally and vertically. We could move our div to the bottom right of the page by changing the alignment. For example, Justify Content, Flex End, moves content to the right, and Align Items Flex End moves content to the bottom. You can experiment with different values to see how they affect positioning. Remember to remove Margin Auto property from the div, since it will conflict with the Flexbox. Okay, let's leave our div in the center. We will practice Flexbox more in the future lessons. For now, remember this: Flexbox is a CSS layout system that allows you to align elements within a container. Use displayFlex to turn element into flex container. Use justify content to align items horizontally, flex start, center, or flex end. Use align items to align items vertically, flex start, center, or flex end. In this chapter, we are going to talk about creating and styling HTML lists. Let's face it, nobody wants to read anymore, so let's replace this huge paragraph with a simple list of interests. The UL tag stands for an unordered list. To add items to our list, we use the LI tag, which stands for list item. So let's add LI programming and then movies, games, cats, and books. Okay, we got our lists of interests. Now, let's style our lists a bit. We can target it using a simple CSS element selector. By default, list items have circular markers, but let's switch things up and change them to squares. To do this, we use the list style type property. We have options like circle, disk, and even decimal numbers. I will pick squares for our list. I would also like to change the color of the list marker. Select list item with element selector, and then double colon, and select marker with pseudo element marker selector. Color, var, secondary color, and now the square markers are bluish color. This is new. The marker selector lets us style the list markers separately from the list items. In general, a CSS pseudo-element is a keyword added to a selector that lets you style a specific part of an element. The syntax looks like this: element name, double colon, and then pseudo-element name. Just to show another example of pseudo-element in action, let's make first letter of every item capitalized, using our knowledge of text transformation styling. List item, pseudo-element first letter, text transform, capitalize. Great, we have our first list. To sum up, use UL tag for an unordered list. Use LI for each list item. Use list style type to change the numbering style of a list. Use pseudo-elements like marker and first letter to style specific parts of the HTML element. Let's create another list. This time, we will list our favorite programming languages using an ordered list. First, let's add a new section with a level 2 heading. H2 Favorite Programming Languages. To create an ordered list, we use the OL tag, which stands for ordered list. Then, just like before, we add list items using LI tag. So LI, C#, and then JavaScript and Python. And there you have it, our programming languages listed in order. By default, ordered lists use numbers, but we can customize this using the list style type property. So OL list style type. Some options include lower alpha, upper Roman letters, or decimal. We can also create nested or embedded lists by adding another list inside a list item. So OL. And then let's add two items, TypeScript and Vanilla.js. And let's use inline style for different marker, so style, list style type, lower alpha. Now TypeScript and Vanilla.js are subcategories of JavaScript inside the list. As you can see, this style still applies to our list. But what if we only want to style the markers of a specific list? We can do that by targeting it with an ID. So let's add an ID language list and then ID selector language list li marker color tomato. Now only the markers for this specific list will be colored tomato red. We just used a new CSS technique, the descendant combinator. Combinators define relationships between selectors. In our case, we want to style list item elements inside language list. This means select all list item elements inside language list and change their markers to red. Another CSS combinator is the child combinator. The child combinator affects only direct children of the language list. The nested list items, TypeScript and Vanilla.js will not be styled with tomato red now. To sum it up, use OL for an ordered list. Use LI to define list items. Use CSS combinators to describe relationships between elements. The descendant combinator to style all nested elements, or child combinator to style only direct children. Let's create a simple glossary with some programming-related terms. H2 glossary, and then DL for definition list container, DT HTML, and this is definition term, the word or the phrase being defined. DD for definition description, so the explanation of the term. And let's add another definition term, CSS, and definition description, cascading style sheets used for styling HTML elements. Each term is followed by its description, making it easy to read. Let's improve the readability of our glossary with some CSS. The element selector, DL, so the definition list, let's add a border left, 3 pixels, solid, and for the color, secondary color. Let's add some padding on the left side, 15 pixels, and let's set max width to 500 pixels, so this is the maximum width of the element. For the DT, so definition term, let's make the font bold, font weight bold, and margin top 10 pixels. And for the definition DD, margin left 20 pixels, and font style italic. Now the terms stand out more and the definitions are easier to read. We can also add a hover effect to make the terms stand out when users interact with them. DT hover, color tomato, and cursor pointer. We just use a CSS pseudo class. A pseudo class is a keyword added to a selector that lets us style elements based on their state. The hover pseudo class applies styles when the user hovers over an element. This is a syntax, element name, and then single colon and pseudo class name. We can also enhance our glossary using the title attribute. So DD title HTML for the HTML definition, and then for the CSS definition, title CSS. And now when we hover over the term or description, a tooltip with an extra information appears. Attributes provide extra information about an element and modify its behavior. To sum up, use DL for a definition list, use DT for the term, and DD for definition. Use the hover pseudoclass to style elements when hovered, and the title attribute to display extra information as a tooltip. Now that we know how to use HTML lists and glossaries, let's design our own list. Instead of listing languages in traditional list, let's display them in flexible layout using span elements. First, let's create a container and a list of span elements inside it. Div, span, C#, JavaScript, TypeScript, Vanilla.js, and Python. The span element serves as a container for other elements or text similar to div, but with a key difference. A div is a block-level element, meaning it takes up the full width of its container and starts on a new line. A span is an inline element, meaning it only takes up as much space as necessary and can appear in the same line as other elements, hence the name inline. Right now, the chips don't look very impressive, so let's add some styling. Class chip, background color, secondary color, and now we apply this class to all span elements. Class chip, and I'm going to copy this class to other elements. Okay. We can check the difference between inline and block elements by adding the display block property to our chip class, which makes span behave like a block element. Display inline and try switching between display block and display inline to see the difference. And let's leave the default inline setting. Our list still doesn't look very impressive, so let's refine the styles a little bit. Let's add padding, 15 pixels for top and bottom, and 35 pixels for left and right. Border radius, 15 pixels for rounded corners. Higher value will result in more rounded corners. Font weight, 600 for thicker font. And let's set font family to monospace family. Now our list looks odd because the chips aren't arranged neatly. To fix this, let's use Flexbox. So let's create a Flex container class with a property display flex and apply it to our div class Flex container. Now the elements are arranged in a row, but they overflow the page. To fix this, let's add flex wrap to wrap elements automatically. And let's also add some spacing between rows, margin top 10 pixels. Now we can play around with the horizontal alignments of the elements, justify content, space between. We are already familiar with some options like flex start, flex end, or center. For this occasion, there are 3 more interesting options. Space evenly, which distributes items with equal space around them. Space around, which adds space around items but with less space at the edges. And lastly, space between, which distributes items with equal space between them. If you resize your browser window to full screen and zoom in and out, you will see how the chips automatically adjust to fit the available space. This is the power of Flexbox. Understanding Flexbox allows you to create responsive designs, meaning your layout will look great on any screen size and zoom level. To improve user interaction, let's add a hover effect that darkens the background slightly when the user hovers over a chip. Class chip and pseudoclass hover, filter, brightness 90%. Now let's add a slight lift effect on hover to make the chips feel more dynamic. Transform, translate y, -3 pixels, moves the chip slightly upwards, and cursor pointer changes the cursor to indicate interactivity. This makes our chips feel more dynamic and responsive. To give our chips more depth, we can apply a shadow. Box shadow. So the first value determines the horizontal shadow size. The second value sets the vertical shadow size. The third value adds blurriness to the shadow. And the last value defines the shadow color. And let's also add opacity 50%. We can add a similar effect to the text, but make it more subtle. Text shadow 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 3 pixels, and RGBA, black color with 0.3 opacity. Let's also apply a gradient as a background color. Background, linear gradient, 160 degrees, and then let's pick two colors. The 160 degrees defines the angle of the gradient, and the two color values create the gradient transition. Experiment with different angles, for example 90 degrees, and color combinations to customize the effect. Lastly, let's implement some chip variants. By default, our chips are filled. Let's implement an outline version. Class chip, class outlined, and this will specifically target chips that also have the outlined class. Background transparent, and border 3 pixel solid with secondary color. To use the outline chip style, simply add the outline class to the chip definition. So span class chip and then outlined. Here, the outline styles are applied on the top of the chip class styles. Now we can easily switch between filled and outlined chip styles. Let's clean up our workspace a little. We will remove the glossary of terms and corresponding styles. Previously, we learned about lists, which help structure data. Another way to present structured data is through tables. Let's create a table to showcase our skills and experience with different technologies. Let's declare the table using the table tag. To add a table row, use the tr tag for table row. The first row serves as a table header, so use the th tag, which stands for the table header. And we are going to have 3 columns: skill, experience time, and experience level from 1 to 10. Now we see a table header. Let's add another row using tr tag, and then add table cell with data using td tag, which stands for table data. Table data HTML, and then in cell for experience time, 3 years, in the cell for experience level, 8. And let's add another row, tr table data CSS, 2 years, and 7. Now we have a structured table, but it's not very readable because it lacks styling. Let's fix that. Our CSS file is getting large, so we will create a separate file named table CSS to keep table styles separate. And to link this to our page, add this inside the head section. Link and press enter and link it to our table CSS file. By default, the table is aligned to the left. Let's make it wider by selecting table element and then width 100%, which ensures the table spans the full width of the parent element. To improve readability, let's add a border. So border 1 pixel solid gray. However, this only adds an outer border. To add borders to an individual table cells, update the CSS like this. Select TH element for table header, and then TD for table cell, and border 1 pixel solid gray. Now we see double borders. To make them connect seamlessly, add border collapse to the table element. Now our table looks much cleaner and more structured. To sum up, use table tag to declare the table. Use tr tag to add table row. Use th tag to add a cell with table header, and use td tag to add cell with table data. Let's refine our table styles a little bit to make it more readable and visually appealing. Let's add padding 5 pixels for top and bottom and 10 pixels for left and right to table cells. And then text align center to align text to the center of the cell. For our table heading, let's add a background color using our website's predefined color scheme. So TH element selector, and then background color, variable heading color. However, the solid color might feel too intense. Let's make it slightly transparent by adjusting the color in the root CSS variables, like this. And let's also apply it to our H1 header for consistency. So H1 color, heading color. By default, all table rows are transparent. That's okay for small tables, but when we add more rows, it can get harder to read. Let's add some more data, and I'm just going to copy this and modify the data slightly. So let's change this to JavaScript, and the second row to C# and experience level to 5. Now that we have more rows, it would be easier to read if every second row had a different background color. We can use the nthchild pseudo class to achieve that. tr for table row, and then colon nthchild, parentheses even, and then background color lavender to make even rows lavender. The nthchild selector selects child elements according to their position among all the sibling elements within a parent element. This will apply the style to every even-numbered row. We can do similar thing for odd rows. Table row, nthchild odd, background color, and let's pick some slightly lighter shade, like snow. Great! Now we can easily distinguish between rows. Let's make the table more interactive by adding a hover effect. Table row, hover pseudo-class, filter, brightness 90%, will darken when hovered, and cursor pointer to indicate interactivity. To better match the overall color scheme, let's make the table header text lighter. Color for text color snow. Now our table is more readable, interactive, and visually appealing. Feel free to experiment with different colors and styles to match your own theme. Remember the nthchild pseudo-class, which allows you to select elements based on their position within a parent element, like nthchild even and nthchild odd. Now that we learned about lists and tables, let's talk about forms and input elements. First, let's create a new HTML file for our contact form. Let's name it contact form HTML so we can keep it separate from index.html. Now, open it with a live server extension and you should see an empty page. And let's quickly add basic HTML using a snippet, exclamation point and enter. Let's give our page a title, contact form. And let's reuse styles from index CSS. So link and link it to index CSS. Now let's add a container for our form, div with an ID contact form. And let's add level 1 header contact form. We can reuse the styles we applied to our About Me container by applying them to contact form as well. So in index CSS, find the About Me ID selector and add ID selector contact form after a comma. Now the styles from index CSS are also applied to our contact form div. Now we can start creating our form. So use tag form to declare a form. A form in HTML starts with the form tag. Inside it, we will add input elements where users can enter their data. Now, let's create a text input where users can enter their name, input, and press enter. We automatically have type text. And let's also give it ID name and name attribute name. The name attribute helps when submitting form data. Okay, we can type something into the field, but it is missing a label. So let's add a label for name, and the title of this label will also be name. Label is associated with a field through a for attribute. In this case, the input ID is name, so label is for name. A placeholder gives users a hint about what to enter. So let's add a placeholder, enter your name. And the placeholder disappears when the user starts typing. HTML supports different data types for inputs. So far, we've used text input. Now, let's add a number input for the user's age. So let's add a new line, BR, and then label for age, and input of type number, and ID, age, and name, age. A number input only allows numbers. Try typing letters and they won't appear. Now, let's provide a message field for longer text input. New line, and then label for message. Message. Text area with an ID message and name message. And let's also add attribute rows for and a placeholder, type your message here. The text area element allows users to enter multi-line text. The rows for attribute makes the field 4 lines tall by default. And users can resize the field by dragging the bottom right corner like this. Finally, let's add a submit button so users can send their message. Button type submit, send. The type submit tells the button to submit the form. Right now, clicking the button doesn't do much. We will handle form submission later. To sum up, use text inputs for entering single-line text like name. Use number inputs for entering numeric values like age or quantity. Use text area for entering longer multi-line messages. Use submit button to submit the form. By default, form elements look quite plain. Let's give them a modern and clean look with some CSS. First, let's create a new style sheet just for our contact form and link it to our contact form HTML page. Link contact form CSS. Now, let's apply input class to all input fields. And inside our CSS, Let's create a class input. And let's add padding 10 pixels, border 0 pixels to remove the default border, border radius 4 pixels for rounded corners. Notice how the border changes when we click on the input. This happens because browsers apply a focus outline automatically. To remove this effect, add outline none. Now, let's make sure our form elements are properly arranged. Apply the form class to the form element. And now let's define it. Class form display flex to automatically adjust elements, and flex direction column to stack elements vertically. Since Flexbox makes child elements take up the full width of the form, our labels and inputs now behave like block elements. We can now safely remove any extra new line tags inside the form. Let's add some interactivity so inputs look better when selected. Class input and then focus pseudoclass. And remember box shadow. Let's set horizontal shadow to 0, vertical shadow to 0, and add 5 pixels blur with a color var heading color. Now, when a user clicks on an input or focuses on it, in other words, it stands out. Let's apply label class to every label element in the form. And let's define this class, label, with a color, secondary color, margin, and remember the clockwise notation, so 15 pixels for the top, 0 pixels for both sides, and 5 pixels for bottom margin. Font size small, and then font weight bold. Finally, let's make the submit button match our design. So let's give it a class submit button, and let's define this class with a width 100 pixels, padding 10 pixels, margin top 20 pixels, and let's use align self flex end. The button is inside a flex container, so we can control its alignment. Instead of affecting all elements, we use align self to move only this button to the end of the flex container. Let's also give it border 0 pixels and border radius 4 pixels for rounded corners. And for the background, let's give it a linear gradient, 135 degrees, and let's pick two colors. So the first color, heading color, and then secondary color. And now we have a color gradient. For the text color, let's give it snow, and also font weight bolder. And let's also make the button glow like our inputs when hovered. So we can reuse those styles. Just add a class submit button with a pseudoclass hover after a comma. And now when users hover over the button, it has the same glow effect as the inputs on focus. Great, this is my final design. And you can customize form styles to your liking. In web development, there are many cases where we want users to choose from predefined options. For example, let's add a topic field to our contact form so users can select the subject of their message. Before we start coding, let's learn how to type HTML elements more efficiently using Emmet abbreviations in VS Code. Start by typing label, but don't press enter yet. To add a class of a label using Emmet, type .label. The dot represents a class in Emmet, the built-in abbreviation system in VS Code. Now press enter, and VS Code will generate a label with a class attribute. And let's also add for attribute topic. To create a drop-down, use Select tag and don't press Enter yet. Dot input, the dot adds a class, and then the hashtag defines the ID, so hashtag topic. And after pressing Enter, VS Code generates a select element with class input and ID topic, and add topic as name attribute as well. Next, add options to let users choose a topic. Option, value, work opportunity, and then label will also be work opportunity. The second option will have value of feedback and label feedback. And the third option will be other with a label other. Now, users can select a topic instead of typing it manually. To sum up, use the Select tag to create a drop-down. Use option elements to define the available choices. In VS Code, use emmet abbreviations. For example, label.label generates label element with class label, and select.input hashtag topic generates select element with ID topic and class input. Another way to let users choose from a predefined set of options is by using radio buttons. Let's ask the user how they prefer to be contacted. So label with a class label, contact method, and let's group our options together with a div. And now input type radio with an ID email, name, contact method, and value email. We also have to add a label for this input, label with a class label for email, email. So another input of type radio, ID, phone, name, contact method, and value phone. And label will be for phone, phone. With this setup, the user can select either email or phone as their preferred contact method. Notice that both radio buttons share the same name attribute, contact method. This makes them part of the same radio group, meaning only one option can be selected at a time. Now, let's adjust the label style to make it look less bold. So class label radio, font size small. And let's apply this class to both labels instead of a label class. We should provide a field for user to input their email address now. So label with a class label for email, email, and input type email with an ID email, name email, class input, and let's also add a placeholder, enter your email. The type email ensures that the input field will only accept valid email addresses. Try it out. If you type something like hello, it will trigger an error. To sum up, use the input type radio element to allow users to select only one option from a predefined set. Group radio buttons by using the same name attribute to ensure only one option is selected. Use type email input to validate email addresses. Checkboxes, unlike radio buttons, allow users to select multiple options from a list. Let's say we want to ask the user about their newsletter preferences, where they can choose multiple topics of interest. Let's add a label with a class label, subscribe to newsletter, and then let's group our options with a div, and then input type checkbox, ID, tag, name, newsletter, and value, tag. And now we have a checkbox. Let's also add a label for this checkbox with a class label and for tag. And the label will be technology. And then let's add a new line and another checkbox, input type checkbox, ID business, name newsletter, and value business. And the label for business. And the third option, and again input type checkbox, ID health, name newsletter, and value health. And label for health. So how this works? The user can check as many boxes as they wish to receive newsletters on different topics. Each input type checkbox element represents a selectable option. By using the same name newsletter attribute for each checkbox, they are logically grouped together. Let's update the label style to make it more subtle. And we can reuse those label radio class by adding another class label checkbox after the comma, and then apply this class to all checkboxes. To sum up, use input type checkbox to create checkboxes. Group checkboxes by using the same name attribute. This makes it clear that they belong to the same form category. Since checkboxes don't restrict users to just one selection, they can check as many boxes as they wish. Forms often include date selection fields, like scheduling a meeting or selecting a birth date. Let's add a calendar input to our form. I just noticed that I mistakenly gave two fields the same ID and name. Let's fix that by renaming the email field to use email address ID instead. So ID email address and name email address. And let's also update the label for email address. Remember that each ID must be unique in an HTML document. And also, unique names ensure proper form submission without conflicts. Now, let's add a date picker field so users can select a date for scheduled meeting. Label with a class label for meeting, schedule a meeting, and then input with a class input and ID meeting, and this input will have type of date. And let's also add a name attribute meeting. HTML natively supports a date picker in most browsers, which means users can choose a date visually instead of typing it, and the browser ensures proper formatting. Now that our form is functional and stylish, let's make sure users fill it out correctly. Some fields should not be left empty. We can make them mandatory with the required attribute. So let's make the name input required. And also let's make the message field required as well. Now we can't submit a form without entering a name and a message. Let's say we currently are not available for meetings. Let's disable schedule a meeting date picker by adding disabled attribute. Also, let's disable radio button for phone, since we didn't provide field for a phone number. A disabled field is completely non-interactive. Users can't click or type in it. Sometimes we want to display information without allowing changes. The read-only attribute prevents edits. So Instead of required attribute, let's add a value equals user attribute and then read only. Now, name has default value user and cannot be edited. But in our case, let's require user to enter their name by leaving the required attribute. For numeric fields like age, we can set limits. For example, minimum 18 and maximum 100. This ensures values stay within the allowed range from 18 to 100. To sum up, required attribute ensures important fields are filled. Min and max values set the allowed range for numeric values. Disabled blocks interaction completely. And read-only makes a field only display information. Let's wrap up this chapter by making something actually happen when the user clicks the Submit button. When a user submits a form, an event is triggered. We can use this event to perform an action, like showing a message. So let's add onSubmit attribute to our form. The onSubmit event fires when the form is submitted. And we will write a simple JavaScript function to handle this event. First, add a script tag inside the head section of your HTML file. The script tag allows you to write JavaScript inside your HTML file. Now, let's write a simple function that will handle form submission. Const onSubmit equals event and then an arrow and open curly brackets. We just declared a function that will run when the form is submitted. Now, event.preventDefault parentheses stops the page from refreshing when the form is submitted, because normally when you submit a form, the browser reloads the page by default. Now let's retrieve the user's name from the form. Const name equals event.target, which refers to the form that was submitted. And then .name selects the input field with the name name, so this field right here. And then .value retrieves the text that the user typed into the input field. Next, let's show an alert with the user's name. Alert, an open parentheses, and inside double quotes write "Thank you for submitting the form," comma, and then plus name, plus exclamation point inside the double quotes. Alert is a built-in browser JavaScript function that displays a pop-up message in the browser. Now, we need to tell HTML to use that function when user hits submit. So onSubmit will be equal to onSubmit, and then let's pass the event. Now, when we fill the form and then press submit, the alert will appear. Udemy restricts free tutorials to 2 hours, so we don't have time to cover JavaScript in depth. But if you want to learn JavaScript step by step, check out my tutorial JavaScript Fundamentals for Beginners here on Udemy. You will find link in this lesson resources. Let's make our index.html page more visually appealing by adding a profile picture. First, let's create a new folder called Resources inside our project directory. This folder will store images and icons for our web page. Now, place your profile picture inside the Resources folder. Feel free to use your own or download this one from Resources. Let's add the profile picture using the EMG tag. The source attribute is the relative path to our image. So in our case, resources/profile. An alt attribute will be equal to profile picture. The alt attribute is there in case the source is not available. For example, if I make a typo in the image path, the alt text will appear instead. And let's revert that. We can set the width and height of an image directly in HTML. So width 100 and height 100. But a better approach is using CSS. So let's remove the width and height from the tag and add ID attribute, profile picture. And now define the styles in CSS. So ID selector profile picture, width 100, height 100, and then border radius 50%. This will make the picture circular. I just noticed that the top of the page is clipped because we earlier set body height to 100 view heights. And now our content is taller than that. So let's remove this line from the body. I would like my profile picture to appear next to the text. We can achieve this using the float property. Float right floats the image to the right, and float left moves the image to the left. Let's also add some margin right 20 pixels to add spacing between the image and text. I think that I will move this entire fragment directly under About Me section, like this, and remove this horizontal line. And also I will wrap the image and text inside a div. And now the experience heading is too close to the image, so let's add a new line. Let's also improve the container around About Me section. So I will remove the border for a cleaner look and add border radius 10 pixels to make corners rounded. Let's also make the table more compacted. Inside the table CSS file, let's reduce padding to 3 pixels for the top and bottom. And let's make the font smaller. Let's also adjust the padding for the chips inside index CSS, 10 pixels for top and bottom, and 35 pixels for left and right. To sum up, use EMG tag to add images. Store images in a resource folder for better organization. Use float property to align the image next to the text. Let's add some external links, like a YouTube channel or LinkedIn profile. To create a link to an external resource, we use the A tag. So let's create a link for YouTube and then another one for LinkedIn. Right now, these don't work because the href attribute is empty. I will add my YouTube channel and LinkedIn links like this. So just paste the address to the href attribute. By default, clicking a link replaces our page. To open it in a new tab, add target _blank and for a second link as well. This tells the browser to open the link in a new tab instead of leaving our site. Feel free to include more links, such as your social media. I will add my GitHub link, A, and the GitHub address, target _blank, GitHub. We can now remove this extra new line above the heading. To sum up, use A tag to create links. Use the href attribute to store the URL. Use target _blank to open links in a new tab. By default, links are blue and underlined, but we can customize them to match our color scheme. Links have 4 different states: normal state with default appearance, hover state when the user hovers over the link, active state when the link is clicked, and visited state after the link has been opened. Let's apply custom styles to our links. For the default link, A, margin right 10 pixels, color variable text color, text decoration none to remove underline. Let's make the links stand out when hovered. A with a pseudo-class hover, color, heading color. For visited links, let's reapply the default link styles. A with a pseudo-class visited after the comma. And active links will be the same as hovered links. A with a pseudo-class active after the comma. To sum up, remember 4 different link states: normal, hover, active, and visited. Use pseudo-classes to style different link states. Let's enhance our links by adding some cool SVG icons. You can find the icons in resources linked in this lesson and place them in your resource folder. I will add icons inside our links, right here, EMG, and for the source, resources/YouTube SVG, width 15 and height 15. Let's also add an icon for LinkedIn, so image with a source resources/LinkedIn, width 15 and height 15. And for GitHub, image with a source resources/GitHub, width 15 and height 15. SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics, is a format for vector images, meaning they scale perfectly without losing quality. They are lightweight, flexible, and ideal for icons. Now, let's add some styles to make sure our icons and link text are nicely aligned. Let's display link as inline flex to turn it into an inline flex container. Flex direction row ensures the icon and the text will appear side by side. And let's center everything to make sure icons and text align nicely. So justify content, center, and align items, center. Let's also create a class link SVG with a margin right 5 pixels to add some margin between icon and link text, and apply this class to our SVG icons inside links. I think I will also add some more text to the bio section. So I will paste those 2 paragraphs. And I will make the text a bit smaller across the side for a cleaner look. So inside the body element selector, I will add font size 14 pixels. And now let's remove any relative font size stylings from the styles. So right here, and make chips padding even smaller. So 10 pixels and 25 pixels for left and right. Alright, so here is the problem. We have 2 separate pages. Our main page, index.html, and our contact form page, contact form HTML. But there is no way to navigate between them. Let's fix that by creating a navigation bar. First, Let's add a nav element to structure our navigation. Nav stands for navigation, and then let's create two divs inside it. And let's add title on the left, so H1 portfolio, and the links will go here in the second div. Remember, earlier in this tutorial, we made the body a flex container. To prevent weird layout issues like this, make sure we have flex direction column in the body styles. Now, let's add our actual navigation links. A, and the address will be index.html for the home page. And let's also reuse index.html for About Me. And then the third link will be to contact form HTML, contact. So this will navigate to contact form. Nice. Now we can move between our main page and the contact form. Since we already applied global link styles, we just need to tweak the layout. So let's add a class navbar to our nav element, and then let's define it. Navbar display flex, justify content space between, so the title will be on the left and links on the right, and align items center. Let's also give it a background color of primary color, width 600 pixels to match the main content width, padding 20 pixels, and margin bottom 30 pixels. And to match rounded corners of our main content, let's make bottom corners rounded as well. So border bottom right radius 10 pixels and border bottom left radius 10 pixels. The browser applies default margins to the body, which might be causing unwanted spacing at the top. So let's reset it with body margin 0. The navbar looks a bit too tall to me because H1 elements have default margins. So let's fix that as well. I will give this element ID title, and then in style sheet, ID selector title, margin 0. Also, instead of a background color, let's give the navbar a subtle shadow. So I will remove this background color, and then box shadow 0 pixels, 4 pixels, 6 pixels, and then let's pick the black color with some opacity. So now we can navigate to contact form from our main page, but the contact form doesn't have the navigation menu. So to make sure users can navigate back and forth between pages, copy the navbar into contact form HTML as well. Now both pages are fully connected. Let's adjust the skill tags to match our overall design. I will use outline chips instead of filled ones, so add outlined class to each one of those. And we will remove the border and keep only a subtle shadow. To keep headings in sync with our navbar shadowed style, let's add some text shadow. H1 and H2, text shadow, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 3 pixels, and then a black color with 0.3 opacity. Let's also shorten this section name to Favorite Technologies. Finally, let's add some margin at the bottom of the page. So right here, margin bottom 30 pixels. Let's wrap up this chapter by making sure our page looks great on all screen sizes. First, let's check how our page looks like in full screen mode. It looks okay, and then zoomed in, Still looks fine. Now, let's press F12 to open Developer Tools. This tool helps web developers test and debug their pages. One of the useful features is Device Mode, which lets us preview how the page would look like on different mobile devices. To enable it, click on the Toggle Device toolbar at the top. Select a device, like iPhone SE, from the drop-down menu. Unfortunately, our page looks unreadable on smaller screens. But don't worry, we can fix this with media queries. So right now, our layout uses a fixed width of 600 pixels, which doesn't really scale well on smaller screens. Our navbar also has the same issue right here. We need to reduce the width on smaller screens. Here's how. Add Media, and then max width 600 pixels inside parentheses, and then open curly brackets. And this stylus will apply when the screen width is 600 pixels or smaller. So we want to change the width of About Me section, Contact Form section, and also a navbar class to be a width of, let's say, 400 pixels. And let's check how this looks like now. It still looks a bit too wide, so let's make it 330 pixels for better readability. So now our page seems to be fully readable on even the smallest iPhones and other mobile devices. You can also use other conditions like minimal width to adjust the layout for bigger screens. Instead of hard-coding widths, let's move these values to CSS variables for a cleaner code. So in the root here, add default width 600 pixels and then let's say small screen width 330 pixels. And now update the styles to use these variables. So right here in About Me section and Contact Form, we will use default width. And the same for a navbar, default width. And for this media query, we want to use small screen width. This concludes our free HTML and CSS tutorial. I'd love to hear your feedback. Let me know what you think. Remember to practice your coding skills. For an exercise, you can enhance your page even more. Here are some ideas to try on your own. You can play with colors. Customize your page to match your style. For example, change colors in root variables. Support dark mode. Go back and tweak the styles to ensure dark mode looks great too. You can test some more on different screen sizes and make sure it looks great everywhere. Thank you for watching my tutorial. If you are interested in learning more about web development and programming, be sure to check out my other tutorials.